Hey, how's it going, guys? Domino Paris 21 here, and here to bring you guys another episode of Meta Talk. So as always, I've been a little bit behind on the set 13 Meta Talks, but now I'm catching up on things now. So of course, what we have here is one of my personal favorite decks of the meta, Tetra Drive Dragon. Now with Tetra Drive Dragon, finally a new amazing boss card for Aqua Force that really synergizes really well with their Break Ride. Does bring Aqua Force back up to its competitive tier that it once was. I think Aqua Force was a little bit out of it for a while, but it's back again with Tetra Drive. So of course, considering this is Aqua Force, got a few local players, fellow Aqua Force players with me. Of course, we got Mr. Clay here.
What's up, YouTube? CardfightKing here.
And you have channels, by the way.
Yes, I do.
What's up, Vanguard people? It's ZachZag here.
Yep. So yeah, ZachZag and CardfightKing will assist me on this since they are fellow amazing Aqua Force players in the area. And don't forget to check out their channels. I will have listed in the description below. Click the link, subscribe, and such. So yeah, as always, we're Meta Talks. Basically, as always, the same formula. We're just going to give our own brief analysis on Tetra Drive Dragon based on the 3 categories, which I always feel makes a competitive deck in Vanguard. Pressure, advantage, consistency. So simple as that. But before we actually get started on the analysis, ZachZag and Mr. CardfightKing, what are your personal thoughts on Tetra Drive and how it changed Aqua Force compared to previous build, which is Maelstrom?
So I mean, I thought Tetra Drive was a pretty good deck, good enough to use for regionals since the deck I actually chose to play. Having a lot of the aggressiveness I like to see out of decks where you can go ham with multiple attacks but only commit one column at a time is pretty good, being able to do the same that you would do to leave yourself less vulnerable to your opponent's response. And being able to be aggressive but only have one source of an attack on their turn is something I like.
For me personally, I think it brings back a new twist on the old Maelstrom style of getting rid of your opponent's card advantages. You're still able to do the whole 4 attacks things, you know, bringing Basil back and everything like that. And you're really able, especially the break ride play, when you're dropping cards from your opponent's hand, killing off their rear guards, they have less resources to use, and this deck really brings that out. Plus, you know, crit triggers I think are the best in this deck, and it really puts a new type of pressure on your opponent.
Get that push.
You know?
So that's why I say with Tetra. So yeah, without further ado, let's actually begin the analysis, shall we? So the first category we're going to be talking about is pressure. How well does this deck pressure your opponent? Well, Mr. CardfightKing, I'm going to go ahead and let you kick things off on this and your thoughts and such, and it'll be a rating out of 5 at the end that you give it.
Okay, well, I really think this deck pressures your opponent to a really high degree, actually. Being able to rush your opponent at different stages of the game is really, really, really good. And obviously, the break ride play, which I think is the best play in Vanguard.
Best combo.
You know, your opponent will drop a minimum of 6 cards. And, you know, with Tetra Drive being able to restand again, you know, you're able to just put so much pressure on it. You're just dropping cards out their hand. And that's what Aqua Force was. Dropping cards out their hand, reducing their rear guard advantage, and overall putting them into a corner.
Yeah, multiple attacks. Every is always good. So out of 5, 5 being the best, 1 being the lowest, how would you rate the pressure that Tetra Drive brings to the deck?
I want to give it a 5 out of 5. But against cross rides, as usual, I would say it'll go back down to 4. But a 5 out of 5 mostly because we have a new draw trigger and Basil becomes live late game, and that is very important to the deck.
Yep, and Mr. ZachZag.
My favorite thing that came out of the set was actually Title Assault for when the Tetra Drive came out. I mean, he added so much to what Aqua Force could be, just because you could play these two in a column with themselves, with each other early. Play him, you swing. Play him, you attack. You get a trigger, you get a 3rd attack. You've committed just 2 cards to the field. That's it. That's 3 attacks. 4th counting your Vanguard. And that's my favorite thing, but like CardfightKing was saying, they're a little bit vulnerable on the attack power side. So one trigger, 111k grade 2, everything's halted.
Right.
It kind of it kind of sucks. But for me, I like the rush that they can provide, but they are fragile too. I mean, if they had an 11k rush guy, that would be great if he was 11K on the defense. That way you can protect some of your fragility that Aqua Force brings to the table.
Definitely.
So 3.5, 4.
3.5 out of 5.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Just for me, for pressure, it's just, well, as you guys already summed up for me, Aqua Force, especially with Tetra Drive, it really just revolves mainly on the brake ride combination with Transcore and Tetra. Because that's something your opponent's going to have in the back of their minds at all times. And also the mid-game pressure it can bring out with the multiple attacks it can easily enable with Basil and Tidal Assault. Can definitely force a lot of guard from your opponent's hands, and it can really dish out a lot of early damage, a lot of potential early damage that is. They can be hindered by damage by any triggers that your opponent may damage check, and kind of like what ZachZag said, there can be times where your offensive presence can be halted. But I think overall, just for how strong the brake ride turn is with Tetra, having a restanding Vanguard, you reusing Transcore skill, and just initiating all those multiple attacks is always bringing out some kind of pressure to your opponent. And of course, if you have Wheel Assault.
Please don't forget about Wheel Assault, but use him sparingly, because you only get so many counterblasts in this deck.
So just be smart with them, but Wheel Assault actually brings out different types of plays for Aqua Force, actually in another category. So yeah, overall for pressure, I'm going to give this deck a 4 out of 5. Just a really good, strong late game turn, but like again, their offensive presence can be halted at times, so there can be some inconsistencies to that. So yeah, so that is our thoughts on pressure. Now moving on to the next category. So the next category we're going to be talking about is advantage. How much advantage does this deck produce for himself? So Mr. CardfightKing, go ahead and let you kick things off.
How much advantage? I would say it produces a good amount of advantage. It actually produces a lot of advantage if you can psychologically trick your opponent, meaning that if you're on Transcore, you have a sizable hand, you're on 3 damage. A lot of opponents that I face don't want me to get to 4 damage because they can't deal with the brake ride turn, and that in itself saves you a damage and allows you to, you know, accumulate more of an advantage in your hand and your field. And being able, again, to brake ride and reduce their hand advantage to almost nothing. Because if they have, like, well, I think it was about 8 cards in their hand, then they could probably block the whole turn. But if not, their hand is gone, their field is depleted, and right then and there you have advantage. But other than that, it is kind of slow, and as you know, Aqua Force is, you got to have the right field setup. So you got to know when to rush and when not to rush.
So it's really up to the player to create that advantage for themselves, right. And it's kind of like the same, works off the same thing I've always said, you know, pressure can lead to good advantage if played right and if you have the right cards for you. But Mr. Cardfight overall out of 5, well, how would you rate the advantage of this deck based on your experiences?
Based on my experiences, I'd probably give it about a 4. No, I'll give it a 3 out of 5 in terms of advantage, due to a lot of people sniping out your rear guards, and your rear guards is what makes the deck what it is, and due to people hitting your rear guards all the time, you know, it's hard to sometimes keep up a rush, especially if they're hitting triggers.
You're more likely to have your rear guards a higher priority than your opponent when it comes to protecting them on the field.
Exactly.
So I agree with that. Mr. ZachZag, how about you?
For advantage, there are 3 cards in the deck that let you pull off the multiple attacks. Wheel Assault, Basil, and Tidal Assault. They're all pretty good cards for maintaining it, but the advantage part, I call it 8 cards, because the turn that you do the brake ride, you're usually dropping 8 cards from their hand. So if you can try and plan around that. I always ask, those are always the questions I ask, be it with Spike Brothers or Aqua Force, how many cards you got in your hand? And everybody hates when I ask that question, but it's not too difficult to pull off the brake ride turn, but it's dependent on other cards, not just the Vanguard though, which is a kind of a drawback for Aqua Force, whereas other cards, they just have to beat, the Vanguard just has to exist for them to pull off their combo.
Yeah, so sometimes you may have to hold back a little bit just to make sure that you can get to that limit break effectively, your opponent's not trying to wear you out and such, so...
Yeah, a good player will always at least hold on to one of the assaults or Basil in their hand to pull off their turn, but if you don't draw into it on your brake ride turn, that sucks.
That's why I like Basil. You can rush with him and he can hide himself. That's the beautiful thing, is that he can hide himself.
Yeah, I mean, it really does depend on the build. Like if well, that will fall into a different category. But overall for advantage, how would you rate this?
3, just because it's too dependent on other cards. But I mean, the 8 card advantage is still pretty nice.
So sweet.
That's really like the gap.
Oh yeah.
So pretty much playing off what you guys said for advantage. Like I said, with Mr. Cardfight King, when this deck is really running at its best, you know, being able to initiate a lot of effective multiple attacks on your opponent, just the advantage you can actually bridge yourself between you and your opponent, having your opponent essentially, you know, using up more shield in their hand compared to you, that essentially can lead to more advantage. But the thing with Aqua Force is when you're enabling all these attacks, it does require you to commit to your field a little bit more than your opponent a lot of the times, and you can be at the point where you can almost say that it is field reliant. So depending on the matchups that you are facing and depending on the players, a lot of times if your opponent can start targeting your rear guards and start wearing you out, so then you're not going to be as efficient the turn you break right with Tetra. But at the same time, that's where the strategy comes in of just kind of holding back a little bit and just waiting until you're able to go off with Tetra and Transcore. But at the same time, that means that you're not really establishing that offensive pressure early on, so there's damage that you're kind of missing out on. So you know, the 8 card advantage that we kind of mentioned with Tetra Transcore, sometimes that's not always going to be as reliable as we think, depending on how the game plays out. So in terms of advantage, the deck just overall requires you to be fully committed to the field, and really the deck running at its best, if it can pressure your opponent well, it will create advantage that way. But in terms of producing advantage for itself, they don't really have many cards to work with outside of Mr. Penguin, Soldier, Sabers. So yeah, overall, I say when it comes to advantage for Aqua Force, I'm going to probably just go with everyone else saying 3 out of 5. When it's running at its best, it builds advantage by minusing your opponent, but in terms of producing for itself, it doesn't really do much for itself. But I mean, that's kind of one of the cons of a very highly offensive potent deck. So 3 out of 5 for all of us. Now next, for last but not least category, consistency. How consistent is this deck? And I think this is really what makes or breaks a deck in terms of how competitive it can be. Because, well, your deck can't run well if you can't do it all the time, right? So, Mr. Cardfight King, let's go ahead and have you kick things off for us.
Consistency, that's the hardest part for Aqua Force. In terms of consistency, it really depends on how you're guarding, you know, what you're putting out on the field, and to me, your trigger lineup as well, because the deck at one point can be very inconsistent. You can't get your columns, you know, you're not seeing your titles, you're not seeing your Basils, or if you play Diamantes, and, you know, then you're going to have to rely on him, and you can only get the, you know, effect off probably, you know, once with him. And so, in terms of consistency, you gotta be smart with how you put your rear guards on the field, where you put them, and also what deck you're playing against. If you're playing against Kagura or Narukami, your rear guards are gonna be gone, so you gotta plan against it. And I want to say with this deck, consistency would probably be a 2 out of, well, I'm going to give it a middle of the road 3 out of 5, just because, again, it is rear guard dependent on what you have in your hand and how effectively you can get things off. But when it's consistent, you got it. And the reason why, and I play 6 draws in my deck because I feel as if the deck needs to, I need to see my rear guards. I need to be able to see them and build advantage. And that's just for me to build up consistency, is to see 6 draw triggers. But overall, I probably give it a 3 out. I'm gonna give it a 3 out of 5.
3 out of 5. And how about you, Mr. ZachZag?
The consistency for this deck is all in trying. If you don't pull off the break right, you kind of fall. You start to fall flat. I mean, the terror in Tetra Drive is being able to pull off a Transcore scale twice in one turn, and it's pretty easy to not do that. So I mean, it's consistent. It's an average consistency. So I mean, it's 3 out of 5. I mean, there are cards that let you pull off the Tetra Drive. If you're a good player, you're playing at least 4, and then probably 3 Basil.
It really depends on the builds for Aqua Force too.
Yeah, but for me, a good deck would max out on some of the cards that let you actually do the combo. Especially depending on the starter too. It's like, why wouldn't you want to get a grade 3 searcher to try and find the card that helps run the deck?
I mean, it makes sense. That's why Eric will always be the best starter for a long time for Aqua Force.
So, yeah, 3.
3 out of 5. For me, for consistency, really when it comes to brake ride decks, the first thing I always look at is how reliable are they on the brake ride. I mean, obviously, of course, you know, when you talk about between Tetra Drive and Transcore, you know, although it's a very powerful combo and it could lead to a lot of wins, you know, do you necessarily have to rely on it? You know, do you lose if you don't get the Transcore? It's not entirely, but Transcore just helps the deck win more. But a restanding Tetra by himself is still fine. It's still a restanding Vanguard, backed up by, you know, multiple attacks. But kind of like what ZachZag and CardfightKing did mention, you know, the combination is just so powerful that you almost feel like you are relying on it to win most of your games, and it can definitely come back in a lot of games for you. Now, in terms of consistency itself, on paper you could say the deck can be a little inconsistent because you have to initiate forward attacks, but with the release of Wheel Assault introduced in set 13, that I hope you guys are running at least 3 to 4 in your deck, Tidal Assaults, and you're still running Basil, I mean, as long as you have enough enablers built in your deck, that should never be a problem. But there are times where, those rare occasions where you maybe don't have them. Maybe you just don't draw into them, your opponent gets blown up when you call them on the field. So there can be times where that happens, or maybe you do have a field to get the 4 attacks, but they're not quality attacks that may be effective enough to pressure your opponent's hand and to really go off on your opponent's Vanguard. Also at the same time, you know, if you're behind in damage, your opponent's maybe sitting at 2 or 3 damage, there are times where maybe the Tetra and Transcore combination is not enough to make a big enough push too. So it's not even just of drawing the right cards to get the combos, it's also making sure you have a very efficient field to get the most out of the combo as well. So in terms of consistency, I'm gonna pretty much agree with the other guys here. I'm gonna give it a 3.5 out of 5. So simple as that. I mean, as long as the deck is built well, there shouldn't be too much consistency issues. This is more of like how game breaking the combination can be for you. So that's really my thought on it. So yep, that is everything for you guys. Mr. CardfightKing, why don't you go ahead and just mention, just reintroduce yourself just for all the subscribers.
Alright, what's up VGTubes, CardfightKing. Definitely like, comment, subscribe this video, and take a look at my channel. I'll be pumping out a lot more content for you. A lot of discussions, I do talk a lot. So, yeah, go ahead, check that out, and I hope you guys like it.
So yeah, subscribe.
Definitely.
And ZachZag.
And ZachZag from Vanguard, people. I still play some Vanguard. I like Buddy Fight a lot more right now. So I mean,
if you're interested in Buddy Fight, check him out.
Yeah, check out my channel for Buddy Fight.
I will not have Buddy Fight on my channel though.
Not yet.
No. Not yet.
No. But yeah, that's it, guys. As always, leave a comment down below, and for any Aqua Force viewers out there, feel free to leave your own little ratings and analysis, what your thoughts are. But yeah, other than that, guys, thank you guys again for watching, and we'll see you guys later. Bye.